I just want to thank you all for being here with us. Very pleased to be with you today. A big welcome. I want to thank my two colleagues here, Peck and Greg, for helping to organize this today. And really, let me share. I have some slides that I want to share with you here. I hope you can see that. Please let me know. Is it clear? Can you all see that? So really the goal today is to say a few words about this program, the Leading and Coaching Across Cultures COF certification program. But I want to first say a few words about the underlying philosophy, and then talk about what is this COF assessment tool and what are the applications of this tool, and then give you some idea about the program itself and the benefits of the program. I want to share this with you, and then I want to make sure that we have time for Q&As, because you may have a number of questions, and we want to have a dialogue. So I'll start more in a presentation mode, but however, feel free if you have some burning questions to ask them. You could put them, for example, in the chat, and my colleagues, Peck and Greg, will let me know. Sometimes you may have a question and I might be able to address that. So in this case, I will just continue. And but if there is a burning question, we can suddenly stop. We don't need to wait until the end. What I would like to say, first of all, here, let me go to the next slide. So really the underlying philosophy, what this is about unleashing the power that resides in cultural diversity. Cultural differences could be a problem, could be a source of difficulties, but they can be an asset, they can be a real strength. But it's not enough to declare that cultural differences are a richness. We need to do something to unleash the power that resides in cultural diversity. And that has been what I've been working on for a number of years. I discussed this in my book, Coaching Across Cultures, and people have an opportunity to experiment with this during the seminar itself. It started with the realization that traditional coaching has assumed a worldview that is not universal, and it is increasingly insufficient to address the complex challenges that we face. I'm a member of the ICF, the International Coach Federation, and for a long time, among the 11 coaching competencies was the core competencies was the notion that you need to be clear, direct in your communication. And I have a colleague who said clear is not even enough. You need to be blunt, because otherwise people are not going to get it. And this is just an example of a belief that may not be universally applicable. I also am, these days I've been for over 10 years a professor in Japan, and I can tell you that if you're only direct in your communication, you may offend people, and the coaching is going to stop right there. So the idea is to realize that what may seem obvious, yes, we need to be direct, we need to be clear, is not a universal panacea. We need to take into account the cultural perspective into coaching, into leadership. And what I've set out to do is to try to integrate that into coaching in a systematic fashion. So this work started several years ago, and I did a first presentation on the topic that was in 1999, first presentation in London on this topic. And since then, there was the first book, Coaching Across Cultures, and then the second book, Global Coaching. And the seminar I'm talking about today is the first edition of that took place in Brussels in 2006. Since then, we have had a number of seminars in different parts of the world, in South America, in the US, in many European countries, in Australia, in Asia. And since last year, I have not put that on the slide, but since last year, we have done this online. The COF assessment exists since 2006 as well, but there is a new version since 2018. All right, so one thing that is confusing for people, I find, is that they see the title Coaching Across Cultures, and they have the idea that the goal is to enable more effective work across cultures, and that is certainly one of the goals, although it's not only in an international sense. There is a more fundamental goal that we have here, And that's really to promote a more creative and complete form of coaching. And the idea is that we all have our biases, our cultural biases, and that's okay. But sometimes that could be limiting. And the idea is that if we find that those biases we have, a certain way of thinking, a certain way of communicating, a certain way of managing time, proves limiting for us and for people around us, we have an opportunity to revisit the cultural assumptions that we are making, to learn from other cultures, and to go beyond our previous limitation. And in that sense, intercultural coaching opens new possibilities. It's a more creative and complete form of coaching. And therefore, it is for everyone, for all coaches, but it's also for leaders, for managers, and for anyone who wants to use more of their potential. All right, so when I talk about culture, there are many definitions, but the one definition I want to propose is that it's a set of characteristics that would distinguish the member of one group from another group. So in other words, it's a group phenomena. But one important point I want to stress is that we are typically part of several groups. So here the emphasis is not only on comparing nationalities, but to look at different groups we belong to. We may be part of a certain generation, of a certain profession, we may work in a certain organization. So we all have typically multiple cultures. And our behaviors will in fact depend on the group we are associated with at a moment in time. So when I talk about characteristics, I'm referring both to visible characteristics, the artifacts, products, and behaviors we see, but also to the invisible part, the norms, values, basic assumptions that are connected to those visible manifestations. And it's important to be mindful of these invisible part as well. What I want to emphasize here is that our view of culture may be a bit different than the traditional view. What we are emphasizing is really an inclusive and dynamic view of culture. What I mean by this is that we are encouraging our participants throughout the seminar to think in terms of and versus or. So this is going to be less about saying the French are like this and the Americans are like that. Not to say that we cannot make those generalizations, but it's more about, for example, saying that, hey, this person may have a preference for hierarchy, this other person a preference for equality. How could we have possibly the best of both worlds? Could we have, if possible, the cake and eat it too? How could we have the best of hierarchy and equality, or the best of direct communication and indirect communication? And beyond this, how can we continue to learn and grow by learning from alternative cultural perspectives? So we are not giving up our cultural preferences, but we are in a process of continuous enrichment, learning from others. All right, so culture this way can continue to evolve. We are not stuck with certain cultural habits or certain cultural beliefs. To illustrate this, I just want to give an example. In coaching as we know it today has started in the US, and there is in the US this belief that if you work hard, if you persevere, you can achieve anything. And that's a great belief in the sense that it can work like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I believe I can achieve anything, I probably will work very hard to make things happen, and ultimately I may achieve success even against all odds. So that's the good news. The issue, however, I don't know about you, but in my experience, we don't have all the power. There is something, I don't know how you want to call it, luck, fate. I'm not sure how you want to call it, but we have certain limitations. And if we don't see that, we risk going beyond our limitation and pushing others beyond their limitations. That may involve getting injured, getting sick, or cheating even because we want to succeed so badly. So here's another perspective. Inshallah, if God will, the idea here is that the power is outside of us. So if we take this literally, that's not going to be very effective because we may as well stop doing anything and stop working. But the wisdom here is the appreciation that there are certain limitations, and we might as well accept what we cannot change and learn how to let go. The idea is not to have humility instead of control, but again, both as much as possible together, acting with determination as much as possible, as well as accepting what we cannot change. And if we do this, I would need more time maybe to explain this, we can achieve sustainable success, success that takes our limitations into account as well as limitations of others. Let me give another example. Scarce time. It's another common belief that, hey, there is never enough time to do all the things we need to do. And as a result, we need to rush to learn to be very productive, very efficient, to learn how to do a lot of things in a short amount of time. And that's great, but we as coaches, if we do that, or if we do that as leader, we may inadvertently push people to become so productive that they end up being overwhelmed. And another perspective here would be interesting to consider, and that's the notion that time can also be plentiful. If I believe that time is plentiful, I can slow down, I can take the time. And paradoxically, when I slow down, when I take the time, I may end up better appreciating the scarcity of time. When I slow down, I can better discern what is truly important. I can become effective doing the right thing as opposed to just doing things right. And again, it doesn't have to be one or the other. We want to promote effectiveness as well as efficiency. That's the idea. But we don't want to fall prey to just one of these perspectives. So it's all about broadening our range of options, our behavioral repertoire, by learning from alternative cultures. All right, so hopefully that gives you a sense. I hope it's okay. Again, if there is a burning question, feel free to interrupt me. But let me tell you now about what is needed in practice to address this cultural perspective, because there are so many things we could talk about. Now we need a roadmap to navigate the cultural terrain. And what I propose here is not a roadmap that will tell you everything about the cultural terrain, but at least will give you some indication about salient characteristics in the form of cultural orientations. I gave some examples already: direct versus indirect communication, scarce time versus plentiful time, control versus humility would be example of cultural orientations. And the cultural orientation framework, I have to say, I didn't reinvent the wheel. My work is based on the work of many interculturalists, starting with Talcott Parsons in the 50s, and then Kluckhohn and Strothberg in the 60s, Hofstede, and many others. I've just taken a number of cultural dimensions, grouped them in 7 categories, which I think you will agree with me matter. All these categories are important for coach, for managers, for leaders to be mindful of the fact that there are different ways of communicating, different ways of managing time, and so on and so forth. And the model looks at 17 dimensions in particular. But what I think is unique also about this model is that when you are certified to use the tool, you are not even limited by these 17 dimensions. You can create your own customized COF dimensions in addition to those 17 dimensions. And maybe something I need to say, some of you who are interculturalists may be familiar with some of these dimensions. The way I use this, again, to emphasize, is less to say that the French are like this, the Americans are like that, the Chinese are like that, although we could use the tool to, to compare results in different nations. But I'm more using this as a vocabulary so we can become mindful of our tendencies and ask ourselves, does this work for us or not? For example, polychronic time. If I'm a manager and I tend to do a lot of things at the same time, maybe I need to, but maybe I'm taking on too much and I end up being very distracted. So for me, the developmental opportunity would be to focus on fewer things, to go more into monochronic time, for example. So we are looking at what are we overusing, what are we potentially underusing, so we can discover avenues for development. So that's the tool. And, the tool is really about facilitating the understanding of salient cultural characteristics for individuals, teams, and organizations. And when you are certified to use the tool, you have access to this project management part where you can set up, create a series of projects with, for example, additional dimensions. You can look at the results individually, collectively, generate all sorts of reports. I'm not going to go into the details, but I would be glad to share the slides with you of the features. But maybe something to stress is the fact that we are not only looking at your cultural orientations, we are also looking at your abilities. Let me give an example. If I'm direct, if my preference is to be more direct in my communication, that would suggest that I believe it's important to be very clear in the way you communicate. But that doesn't mean I'm necessarily good at that. I could prefer direct communication. I could believe that it's important to be very clear when you speak. However, I may still be shy. So my ability for direct communication is not necessarily so good. So the tool is measuring both the orientations and the abilities. And it allows you to create supplemental dimensions, as I've said, and also to aggregate data in all sorts of ways. In fact, gender, country, and age, those would be standard categories, but you have the possibility to create your own categories. So if you wanted to compare, for example, company A versus company B, if you are doing a cultural audit, you could do that. If you wanted to compare the subcultures at different hierarchical level, or to compare the marketing versus finance versus human resources, you could do that as well. There are different versions available. It's already in several languages, including Chinese and Japanese, and in a few days it will be available in Russian as well. It's also in French, in German, in Spanish, and I think some other languages I may be forgetting right now. The applications, just to say a few words about that, it starts with the self. I think it's important to be aware of our own biases. And so in the seminar, we emphasize that very much, reflecting on our own tendencies. During the seminar, we also give our participants a chance to practice one-on-one coaching. And that's a clear area of application for the COF. Team coaching is also a very important area of application. There is research suggesting that when notably at Harvard University, that when you can cultivate diversity in a team, cognitive diversity in a team, you will end up with more creativity and innovation, as well as increased performance. Coaching across cultures is about deploying the potential in team that resides in cultural diversity, and we show you how we do this. And participants in our seminar have a chance to work in teams and experiment this firsthand. We also address the topic of organizational development. For example, merger, acquisitional alliances, the statistics are just terrible. Over half of these ventures fail. And there are several reasons for that, but culture is one of the main reasons. But it's not a fatality. If you address this and if you can turn this cultural factor into an advantage and promote unity in diversity, which is also, I think, what we are doing in this work. If we can all help to promote a bit more unity and diversity in the world, I think we would all be better off, because there's certainly a need for that. So those are the different areas of applications. All right, so far, so good. Is it clear for everyone? Do we need a short break for questions, or are you okay if I say a few more things about the tool and the seminar?
Philip?
Yes.
We have questions from Nawal.
Yes.
Probably we can answer these questions. How
Yes.
to balance between the cultural approach and the personality approach in an organization?
Okay. Well, we are the two are complementary. We could say that culture is essentially about nurture, what we have acquired along the way. And because typically what we have learned along the way, we have learned in different groups we have been part of. And then we have our personalities, defined in different ways. But one way, if I look at Jung, talks more about what we are born with, or natural characteristics. We are looking, although the seminar focuses primarily on nurture, we are also addressing nature because, and I will say this later, we also put this in a broader context of global coaching, an integrated approach that looks at human development from multiple perspectives. Culture is one of the perspectives, but psychology is another perspective that would look at personality, would be another one. But we also look at the physical perspective, the spiritual perspective. We are looking at, really the ambition is to help unfold the rich, multifaceted potential that we all have individually and collectively. So we will address that, but the focus during the seminar is still on the cultural perspective. All right? So let me, I hope it's okay to continue. Let me say something. I think it's one thing to theoretically talk about this or to describe this in my two books. You know, I give many examples also of how to leverage cultural differences. But it's another thing to actually experience this firsthand. And I think that's maybe a key thing that our participants tell us in the seminar, that they have lived what they have learned is a key message. For example, in one activity, we have a group of participants. Typically, we have participants from all over the world, very diverse backgrounds as well. Some may be professional coaches, some may be leaders, some may be HR professionals, some may be interculturalists. And it's really about experimenting the richness, but also I have to say the difficulty sometimes of having to work in a team like that. And they are able to overcome this and to turn these differences into a richness. That's when people can really appreciate the message. It's when you have experienced that firsthand. And that's the biggest lesson beyond the theory, beyond the models. So that's what is happening. Until last year, that was happening face-to-face, but I was impressed by how much can be done virtually as well. With Peck and Greg here, we had our first online seminar that was just a few months ago. You see a photo here. Before that, last year, we also had the program at the University of Cambridge, and we'll be doing this again next year at Cambridge. That is not remotely, though. That was face-to-face. But what was also impressive in this COVID period is, you know, we are forced in a way to work remotely. I had the chance to do this for a Russian audience last year. And it was not only remotely, but also with simultaneous translation. And we were also able to connect, and our participants were able to make the most of their own differences. They were also from different nationalities, although they all spoke Russian. And I want to also mention that Tessa Breis is delivering the seminar in a Spanish version, and she will be doing that again later in this semester for a Spanish audience as well. And the seminar is also in French. It will be online for the first time next month, actually, as well. So I'm not going to go into the details here of the program benefits, but I think it's really a journey of personal development. So you will learn something that will serve you, I believe, individually, but also will better equip you as leaders and as coaches. You become certified to use the tool. And that was the question, I think, now what was asking about even going beyond the cultural perspective. We will be talking about multiple perspectives to foster sustainable and global success. And last but not least, being part of a network of global professionals and executives. I will say more in a moment about being part of this network and some of the events we are now organizing. This is really a support network, and a network that can serve for potential collaboration and a network of like-minded people all over the world today. Something I want to stress is that this is much more than a 3-day program, or in the case of our program in April, it's going to be 6 half days. By the end of these 3 days or 6 half days, you are COF certified, and you get also credits by the ICF. For those of you who are coaches, you get almost 20 hours of core competencies as part of having participated in the program. But we encourage you to go beyond that at no extra cost, to put that into practice in some concrete projects, and then to report back about what you did, either with a team or with 5 individuals. And when you have done that, you become COF Master Certified Coaches. And until recently now, you also will obtain additional ICF credits for that. So in total, you can obtain 48 credits. That's more than what is needed to be recertified every 3 years. So something to realize, it's the journey doesn't stop after the 3-day seminar. And we are providing ongoing support in different ways. One is the LCSC Leading and Coaching Across Cultures alumni virtual gatherings, which is a chance for people to present some of their work, how they've used the COF, for example, in different ways, very creatively. And this is also an opportunity for some supervision and intervision, helping each other to address some of the challenges we face. So we are also connected on LinkedIn, WhatsApp, so beyond these sessions to be able to have some support and on our respective journeys. We are also sharing, for example, this is a chapter I wrote on cross-cultural team coaching with some concrete examples of how this can be applied in practice. And you all have access to that once you are participating in the program. An example here of a debrief session, how do you use the COF concretely in one-on-one coaching, some videos that we are creating and that we are making available as part of the ongoing support. And I'm also available. People reach me out if they need help. I don't promise that I can respond always immediately, but I'm always there to provide support as soon as possible to people. A lot of information in a short amount of time, but hopefully that gives you some idea. And let's open for questions.
Yep. Please feel free to
ask them directly, and we don't need to go necessarily via the chat. So.
Yep, you can take yourself off mute. We have a questions from Mari here.
Yes.
What is the rough size of each training session?
Okay, I think you saw in the photos, it's around, I would say 15 people would be typically the number, and up to 21. We put a limit. We don't want to have a group that would be too large. So people can all actively participate. We also break the group into subgroups. So for example, when we have practice sessions, when you have to practice one-on-one, we break the groups into groups of 7 or 8 max. So everyone has a chance to participate, to get feedback. So we find that that's a good size group to have both the diversity of participants. Participants tell us that they learn a lot from each other, of course, as well. And not too big that, hey, this is becoming more like a conference where you cannot actively participate. But to be honest, the size depends each time. I mean, we may have less sometimes, more, but not beyond 21. Of course.
Yeah. And we have one very good questions from Remington. I assume COF work for teams of the same cultural backgrounds, for example, Chinese, please confirm. Yeah, basically the heterogeneous team. Yeah, homogeneous team.
And the question is a good question, but it, again, because the question shows that we are so used to the notion that culture equates nationality. And I'm trying to propose that culture is not just the nationality. So yes, it will work if you only have Chinese, but even if you only have Chinese, you will have cultural diversity, because we all have, it is exceptional that everyone would have the same cultural orientation regarding time, thinking, organization, and so on. And so there will always be some diversity in the team. And sometimes, even if the team looks homogeneous, that the CF results all appear to be the same, I would argue that there is still diversity, because potentially we all have all these cultural orientations available to us. And it's a matter of unfolding something that is potentially available to us, but that we may not necessarily have used. So if everybody in the team prefers direct communication, there is still the possibility to connect with the indirect part in us, the part that would invite us to be more sensitive in the way we communicate. So yes, Hamilton, a long answer to say yes. Thank you, yes. Any more questions?
We can open it to the floor. You can take yourself off mute.
Yes, feel free. If you have a question, you don't need to necessarily go to the chat.
Yeah,
I see it.
Yep.
Does it have a time limit? No, it doesn't. It's not like the ICF where every 3 years you need to recertify. Yes, it doesn't, but we trust that people, when they use the tool, continue to learn. We encourage people to engage in a lifelong learning journey. And as it turns out, those who participate in the program are already on that journey, eager to continuously learn, not just about culture, by the way, but about human development in general. So I think it's important. We rely on everyone to ensure you keep your expertise, you increase your expertise along the way. But once you're certified, unless you do something terrible that would cause some problem, I've never seen that actually, you remain certified. So you're certified, of course. Huh? The master certification involves this additional work that we encourage you to do beyond the 3-day program.
Yep, and also we will share the flyers that Phillips mentions about the programs brochure in the chat in a short while. So, yep, there's some requests here. Yep, thank you.
Yes. All right. Any question or any reaction? And feel free to put your camera on. I've done this. Yes.
Sylvia, any questions? You see it, Sylvia?
No questions. It all made perfect sense to me. So the only question I have are relating to getting the flyer and get more details about the actual dates and times to sort out. But yes, I thought it was very interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. Yes. We will.
And there's a question from Lily.
Lily,
sorry. I also don't have questions. Okay. If since you asked, is there any like entry requirement?
Well, we find that not really. We find that those who participate, those who are attracted to the program and participate, typically have already some experience, but the experience could be of different nature. So we have people who are already very senior coaches who participate, but we have people who have never coached, and they can have great expertise, for example, in interculturalism. Or we have leaders with already great leadership expertise, and we find that mix works quite well actually. And there is almost a self-selection in the sense that people who participate in this are already quite curious, eager to to embrace cultural diversity and make the most of cultural differences. And so initially we thought of having some criteria, but we find that people who participate are already, how do I say, have come with the right attitude and with an experience that may be different, but is always valuable. And it's our role to help people tap into that and ensure that everyone can learn from each other.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask, because you've been talking about culture and you've touched on diversity, but diversity and inclusion is quite a topic now. So do you also cover explicitly some of the policies and topics that have come up in this context?
Yes. Sylvia, I want to refer you to, I have if you go to my LinkedIn profile, it just happens that I wrote an article titled Diversity and Inclusion 3.0. And yes, we touched on that during the seminar. The point I'm trying to make is that we can look at diversity and inclusion in different ways. There is a more traditional way of making sure that I call this diversity and inclusion 1.0. It's based on social psychology. It's also based on traditional interculturalism, just becoming, for example, mindful that the Chinese may have certain habits that are different from the French and so on, and being open to the minorities, making sure we include the minorities, that everyone feel welcome. So that is addressed in this article that I've written, but I have to say that is not the main emphasis of the seminar. In the seminar, we are primarily emphasizing what I would call diversity 2.0 and 3.0, which is 2.0 is about cognitive diversity. How do we take advantage of looking at reality from multiple perspectives, that we are not all thinking in the same way, we are not all communicating in the same way, we have different ways of organizing ourselves. How do we take advantage of that? So that's clearly an emphasis in the program. And diversity 3.0 would be the realization that diversity is in us, even if it has not been deployed. How can we tap into the hidden diversity? So I explain this in more detail in this article that I've written, a short article on LinkedIn. And but in fact, we have in our alumni gathering, we have several diversity and inclusion specialists, and some of them will be speaking in some of our next gatherings. So they may be more expert than I am in, for example, specific policies. How do we make sure when we recruit people, we have enough people from the minorities and so on? We are not really addressing that, to be honest, in the program itself. All right. Thank you, Sylvia. If either some questions, or maybe if I can turn to some of you who have participated in the program. If you, I mean, that could include you, of course, Greg and Peg. You have not only participated, but you have also be co-facilitating that. Do you have any comments or anything you want to share? Or Annie, I see you here. I don't see you, but I see you are present. Anything you want to say about how was the experience for you, Annie? Just in case we don't have more questions.
Yep, I see Annie Hong has her camera on. Annie, to say something.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Annie, huh? But
so what did you say, Philip?
No, I just don't feel obliged to say anything. But if you want to make any comment about how was the experience for you, you attended the program. It was in Shanghai already a couple of years ago. Anindita, if you want to just give those who are participants today, just give them a sense from your perspective of how was the experience for you. Don't feel obliged, huh? But anything you want to share.
I think the most important part is I'm originally from Taiwan and I'm based in Shanghai. I just came back to Shanghai and right now I'm in the quarantine hotel. So I find usually, because when you work in an international city like Shanghai itself, and I'm working in the German firm, so your clients are coming from everywhere, and for example, in China, there are many multinational companies, and there are many people coming from everywhere, not only Chinese, but even if, for example, it's a German company, but you can still find French and some other nationalities. And usually when you face them, you have this bias that they are from this country and from this country and from this country. And I find COF, the at least for me, the most beneficial part is COF. It's like a reminder every time when you want to judge somebody, then you step back, then you think, this is not angle I will go to. So that is a very beautiful reminder. And also we constantly share with our coach colleagues about this. And also this is not really for coach, I would say it's for also just in general people who would like to know about human, let's say, this certification would definitely provide you a different perspective and dimension in terms of perceiving people.
Thank you, Annie.
And in terms of the application, probably built on Annie's point there, I'm based in Beijing and PAC. I use it a lot for a Chinese team, if relating to the questions that some of you might have, other than the group that coming from different countries. I use that in the homogeneous team, and that's really helpful in getting the team in terms of managing the teams, as well as leading the teams in the different, understanding them in terms of their different cultural preference. That was really helpful. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
One more thing I would like to add is, because we always run this group workshop, like group coaching. So when we enter the company, usually, like I mentioned, there are multinational nationalities there, and I think COF is very quick for a coach to quickly identify everybody's culture, let's say, not only about where they come from, but their culture. So this is a faster way for you to assess the group that you are coaching.
All right. Thank you, Annie. Greg, anything you want to add about, I mean, we've been doing it for some time, and you have also...
Yeah, so for me, how I use the tool is not only to manage or leverage cultural differences, but I use it for myself and also for my clients, for them to identify development options, which means maybe you see time like this or you think like this, but with the COF, you know that there are other possibilities. And by identifying these other possibilities and tapping into these possibilities, then you expand yourself.
Yes, great. Well said. Yes, that's yes.
So and I'm like Annie. It's also for me, it's give me like a map, right? So when I have tensions in my practice, or if I have some individual clients or team clients that have tensions, right? The COF help them to put some words on these tensions by translating this tension into cultural differences. And when they're translated into cultural differences, then they have ways to work on it. So I use it in my daily life, either at work or in my private life.
All right.
Yeah, yes. There's a questions from Deb here.
Yes.
How does COF differ from other intercultural assessment tools?
Well, thank you. That's an important question. There are several differences. A lot of tools would emphasize national differences, and you would have a report that would tell you that, hey, you are like this, and compare you to the norm, like you're more like a Japanese. For example, I use a tool, and on some of the dimensions, I was like a Japanese. On another dimension, I was like an American. I was never like a Belgian, actually. But it gives you also a prescription. And that can be quite useful. I mean, if you, for example, you would go in a different country and you don't know really about that country, I think that can be very beneficial, because these other tools would give you some tips. Actually, you go to China, here are some tips you could consider, and so on. This tool is a bit different in the way that, first of all, the emphasis, as I said, is not only on national differences. We are looking at all sorts of differences, and you have the possibility to aggregate data in all sorts of ways. So per generation, per division in your company, comparing organization culture A, organization culture B, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the differences. Another difference is that the tool is, in a way, very straightforward. It is the questions are very straightforward and invite you to think. They are questions directly related to the concept itself. So we are not measuring the concept via some behavioral equivalence, but we are asking you to reflect on how you communicate, how you think, how you manage time. This has advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage is that this tool is not appropriate, for example, for selection or for evaluation, because you can easily, if you want to appear as I'm great as I'm a fantastic communicator in direct communication, you can certainly respond in a way that will turn out that you appear very good in this area. So you can fake the results if you want. So this tool is not appropriate for selection. However, for development or for cultural audits where there is no incentive to cheat, I think the tool can be very beneficial, and the results tend to be more valid in my experience than many tools, in the sense that one of the issues sometimes with certain tools that they've been validated in one context. For example, I use a tool in Europe, and that was working very well. I use it in the US, but now I was some years ago delivering some program in Singapore, and my participants were telling me, but that doesn't work. You know, these results don't seem to work for me. The conclusions here don't apply to me. I could have said to them, hey, but I can show you 10 validation studies that prove that this is right. I'm not sure I would have convinced them, because the issue is that it had been validated in a certain context where a concept was tied to a certain behavioral manifestation, but in a different context that didn't work in the same way. So we are doing something in a way that is simpler. We are looking at the concept itself. So a long answer to just say the tool is more straightforward, perhaps, not conducive, not good for, not appropriate for selection, unlike other tools that may be better at that. Doesn't come with a prescription, so that is a disadvantage of the COF, but it's also an advantage in the sense that what I often say during the seminar, the results don't matter per se. What matters is the reflection you can have and the conversation you can have. So, so we treat the tool as it is, just a tool, just a starting point for conversations, for generating insights. And the intercultural coach plays an important part in helping to have the conversations with coaches with the necessary subtlety and care, as opposed to saying you have these results, therefore it's not this.
Philip,
does that make sense? Yes, Deb, thank you.
Yeah, Philip, we have one
in a
more
way,
question.
It's complementary. I want to say that you may use this one and another one. It doesn't have to be this tool or another tool as well. Yes.
Yeah, Philip, one more question from Mary here. Once someone has been trained in COF methodology, do you need to have others take the test every time in order to work with them? Or are we equipped to also support people even if they haven't responded to the test?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Mary, would you like to take yourself off mute?
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm not sure I have my headset ready.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to know if the test results were the prerequisite in order to understand somebody and support them the best way, or are we able to draw, I would say, a global understanding, and then we're able to work with people a bit more off the cuff?
You can work without the test. You can. It's possible to engage with people without doing the COF. The COF, and to have some ideas and to ask some of the questions and to engage in a dialogue with them without the COF. But the COF makes that more systematic and allows to uncover some blind spots that probably we would not have addressed if we didn't have these type of results. So it allows you to engage with people in a more systematic fashion. And that's really, I would say, an important added value. All right. I just realized that we are at the top of the hour. There are cultural differences around this. So I just want to acknowledge that some people may want to go. And so I'm going to share one slide again with my thank you to all of you. But this being said, so I know time is scarce, but I'm happy to stay a bit more if you have more questions. So for those of you who want to leave and need to leave, please feel free to do so. And don't hesitate to contact us again if you have more questions. But I'm happy to stay a bit longer if some of you have more questions.